Alright, so I'm going to try to give you an introduction of how to use the document camera with ABBYY Reader. So you can see on the screen I have ABBYY Presenter open, and over here I've got the document camera set up. So start out by looking down here. You can see that I have put the anti-glare mask on. I don't know how useful that is, but I'm fairly sure it can't hurt. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is on the settings over here. I have set the autofocus to be off, so this is in single shot focus mode. So this means that after I've set up the book in the way I want it to be, I have to push this little button here to actually make it focus. This is better when you're using high resolution photos than the continuous focus, because it's more likely to get it right. Alright, so now while I'm working with this, you can see down here, I can see the image of what the camera is looking at through the presenter software. So this is kind of handy because I know exactly what it's going to see. Now when I'm taking the image, I want to make sure that the page is as flat as possible. So in ABBYY you can actually correct the sort of distortions that come from having this be less than perfectly flat, but that's kind of annoying, and it doesn't usually work very well, so it's better to have it be as flat and as straight as possible from the start. So what's nice about a table like this is that they actually give us these lines to sort of help line these things up. That being said, it's never going to come out perfectly. So I'm going to set this as flat as I can here, and it's okay that my finger is showing in there because you can just crop that out later on. So now that I've got this like this, I'm going to go over here to autofocus, click that, and the camera will try to get the best focus it can. And once it turns green, I'm just going to push this button and take the photo. Alright, so now that I've taken the photo, it has wound up over here in the presenter folder. So there's actually a link to this folder on the desktop of the computers that you'll use. I've just got it open over here. And so this is the photo I just took. Not too bad. So now that I've got this here, in ABBYY, I'm going to, so I've got a new document open. So if you don't know how to do this, see the other video I made. I've got a new document open, and now I'm just going to drag and drop this image that was just taken over here. All right. Hold on a second, let me just... Alright, so the first step I want to do is to actually edit the image. So this will let me sort of correct any problems that came about because of the way I did this. So, of course, in actuality, you will have a larger screen than I do, but so the first thing I want to do is crop. So let's zoom out here so I can actually see the full thing. So I want to crop this to, among other things, remove my finger. So the less that is in the image space, the less there is to confuse ABBYY. So I'm going to crop even the column headers, because honestly those numbers aren't terribly useful. I'm going to remove those, but avoid actually removing any useful information. Alright, so now we're cropped. The next thing I'm going to do here is, so you can use a photo, a deskew. I'm going to try to deskew it a little bit. It'll do a little bit better in getting it straight, but not terribly good. What's really going to help is correcting trapezium distortions. I mentioned this before. This is a way to correct for the fact that the page is slightly distorted when you push it down. So, as I said, it's best to just avoid trapezium distortions by doing a really good job from the start of not having them, but you can, to a certain extent, correct for them after the fact. So what I've done here is taken this grid it gives me and drawn it so that, to the extent possible, the lines will match up with the actual lines of text. Now, I've done a reasonably good job of making this turn out right, so the distortions aren't too bad. But be careful that the box you draw actually includes all of the useful information, because anything it does not include will get totally messed up by its correction. Alright, so looks about right. So correct the image. It doesn't change it that much because it wasn't that bad to begin with. Alright, so now I've got the corrected image over here. Let's make this window a little bit bigger. And the next thing I want to do, rather than having ABBYY try to figure out the structure of the page by itself, what I'm going to do is actually click over here to draw a table and just draw the outlines of the table manually. Otherwise, ABBYY can get confused and try to, rather than reading this as a single table, maybe try to read it as several tables. So now that I've drawn that, I'm going to right-click on it and click Analyze Table Structure. And ABBYY will try to figure out the rows and the columns. So you can see here it's actually done a reasonably good job. That doesn't always happen, in which case sometimes you'll have to actually fix that by, so when you click over here, you can see there are all these little icons here for adding rows, adding columns, etc., and for deleting them. So you may have to use those, but in this case it looks like we're okay. So now the next thing I'm going to do is just right-click and say Read Area. And so now we can see over here in the text window, ABBYY has done its best to actually read all the text. So every place where it has a question or it's not sure about it, it's going to highlight it in blue. So you can see that over here. So it's not sure about this asterisk, but it actually did get it right. There's an asterisk there. Where it really has problems is with these dots, which the census uses to indicate basically missing values or things that where a value doesn't make much sense. So for example, this place alum is a purely rural district, so there are some fields that just don't make sense in a rural district, so there will be blanks there. There will also be cases where a district literally did not exist at the time that the census was made, so it'll have blanks. Other times it'll actually indicate that they just don't have information. So you can see for the most part this came out well, other than these missing values, but it's not perfect. So over here, for example, you can see it tried to read wheat, but it thought that there was some sort of, so just sort of zoom in here so you can see this better. So you can see when I click over here, ABBYY will subtly highlight the cell that I've selected, or the area that I've selected in the original image. So from here it's clear that this asterisk should not be here. Another thing I want to point out is that ABBYY does not always know the limits of its own knowledge. So for example, it did not highlight this character over here, which it believes is a C, but clearly it should have, because that is in fact an E. So keep an eye out for those things. Other common errors are that it messes up the sizes of characters. So here, for example, it thinks that there's a small R in between these. And again, it made the EC issue. So to whatever extent possible, so in this table it's not possible, but to whatever extent possible, it's actually best to not let ABBYY read in text. So for example here, I will probably have many more columns dealing with these same districts here, or sub-districts, so it's best to just get it right once, and then copy it over to Excel, and then copy the files, and then stick only to the numerical rows going forward. So let's suppose I've gone through and corrected all of this, and now it looks good. The next thing I want to do is get Excel open. So one thing I should note on the side is that the version of ABBYY I'm using here is 11, but the version that you will have in the computers that you work with is actually version 12. In theory, it's slightly better. You'll have to judge that for yourself, but so some of these things won't match up one-to-one, but still it should look fairly similar. So I can copy and paste this here. Right, so again, there's errors here because I didn't bother to correct them, but let's pretend I had. So now I've got this page over here. Now suppose I want to move on to the next page. So turning back over to the presenter software, you can see over here the next characters right here. So now it's coming out upside down, which is a little bit difficult to read. So this will not be an issue for ABBYY because it will automatically detect it's upside down and rotate it, but it's annoying to work with, so I can actually go into the software itself and tell it to do a complete rotation, so basically a vertical and a horizontal flip. So now, without having to actually touch the camera, I can actually reverse its orientation. So now you can see, unfortunately I can't seem to get the entire book in, but let's suppose I want to just sort of ignore the top columns and the headers, which I would recommend because ABBYY will do a terrible job of reading it anyways. I'm still just fairly short of getting everything in a single shot, so fortunately I will have to move the camera slightly to actually raise it. When you do this, you want to make sure that the camera is actually parallel to the table. Alright, so you're going to have to play around with this technology. I'm new to it as well. I suspect that by the time this is over you will be experts. Alright, so once again I want to sort of get this lined up as much as possible and then flatten it out as much as possible. It's okay that my finger is over there, but alright. And once again, going for the autofocus, taking a photo. Now moving back over to ABBYY. We'll drag and drop the new photo. Again, go to the image editor. Again, crop. Now in this case, so normally I would perhaps, if it were necessary, fix the trapezium distortions, but again in this case it doesn't look necessary, so I'm just going to deskew the image and then exit this. Again, I'm going to draw a table. I'm going to have it do its own analysis. And again, it seems to have done a fairly good job reading where the rows and columns should show up. I'm going to read it. Right. And now let's suppose I had gone through and made all the corrections I have to. Making a terrible example here by being too lazy to do that. So now again, I'm going to copy all of this, and then here I'm just going to line it up with the table structure. And so this would be a complete sort of spreadsheet. So the thing you have to bear in mind, so this will be easier for you once you've sort of seen the code that's used to read this stuff into Stata. You're going to want to figure out a good convention for basically labeling the columns and setting up the structure of these things. So Stata really likes it when you have all of this information with each column as a variable and each row as an observation. So to the extent possible, although a lot of these tables are going to be really elaborate, complicated looking things, you're going to want to try to get it down to that level because it's a little bit harder to sort of fix that stuff once it's in Stata. But so I can, for example, name these things, like I think in this case it's a sub-district. So you have to figure out what this column is. I'm just going to put in this population. Blah, 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 go on and on and on. So whatever all these things mean, you're going to have to figure that out from the table itself. But yeah, so that's the general idea. Hopefully this has been helpful, taking you from start to finish. So these document cameras and computers and the software will all be in the office. So you're really just going to have to experiment with it and try to get it perfect. But this is a learning experience for everyone, and with any luck by the end, we'll really know what we're doing.